We have MSNBC political analyst Joan Walsh. She is also editor-at-large of Salon.com. John Stanton, he's the Washington bureau chief of BuzzFeed.com. He's sitting about as far from me right now as we used to sit from each other at Roll Call many, many years ago. Sahil Kapoor, he's a congressional reporter for TalkingPointsMemo.com. And Congressman John Yarmuth, he's a Democrat from Kentucky. And also joining us now from Stamford, Connecticut, we have Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And Senator, we'll start with you. I appreciate you taking a few minutes this morning. We are seeing some of the initial reaction, at least from Republicans in the Senate, when you have Lindsey Graham, who's suggesting that he wants to pursue sanctions. Some sanctions are being lifted as part of this deal. He's saying he would like Congress to act and reimpose those sanctions, maybe with a 6-month delay. I know we've had Democrats like Chuck Schumer expressing in the past week some reservations about this deal. Do you share those reservations, and do you think Congress right now should be looking at reimposing some sanctions, even on a provisional basis?
I do think there is a continued need for some kind of congressional action, and I will be working with my colleagues on a Senate bill that is careful and cautious, perhaps in delaying the sanctions by 6 months to see what comes of this interim deal. But an Iranian sanctions bill still is very much worth considering and moving forward to achieve. Count me as a skeptic, not about the administration. In fact, I admire the persistence and perseverance of my former colleague, John Kerry, and the administration in seeking to stop a nuclear-armed Iran through some kind of agreement. But this agreement is only interim, only temporary. And the other point that I think is tremendously important is, in this interim space or time, we need to continue vigilant and vigorous enforcement of the existing sanctions. The great advantage for Iran is that it will have the ability to continue exporting oil at existing levels. There's no continued tightening or reduction of those levels. But as to the sanctions in place right now that will continue to exist, we need to prevent a wink and a nod or a stampede toward relaxing those sanctions, and so I think that's very important.
I take that point, but just to follow up for something more specific, then, if you're talking about crafting legislation right now that might have some kind of like 6-month trigger on it, where it wouldn't go into effect for 6 months, what specifically is it that you will be looking for in those 6 months or whatever that period is? What specifically is it that you have to see to say you don't want further sanctions to go into effect?
What's important is what emerges after this 6-month period. Remember that the best intelligence reports say that this agreement would only stop Iran's dash to build nuclear capability by a few months. So during this 6-month period, there has to be continued progress. There has to be a permanent agreement that actually rolls back, eventually, this kind of nuclear capability, not just halting it, but rolling it back. And point number 2, there has to be continued, even enhanced and more vigorous inspection and monitoring. That's an advantage of this interim deal that cannot be disregarded, but it must be real and tangible and effective.
Senator, I wanted to ask you, what do you make of the mood in the Senate right now with regard to this issue, and how do you think the President's announcement and the announcement of this interim deal would affect what's happening on the Armed Services Committee, the efforts by some senators to impose new sanctions? Will this kind of move it in that direction, or is there a doubt in your mind that the Senate might go along with this deal?
There's hope, as there should be, that this deal really is in the Libyan model, as we've just heard the contrast between the Libyan and the North Korean models, and certainly there's a basis for hope in the administration, very hard work and productive results. We can't dismiss this agreement as simply a sham, but it will be tested by what happens in the future. And I think that's the general mood of my colleagues, that we're all hopeful because we want this issue to be solved by peaceful means. But again, speaking only for myself on this score, Iranian actions in the past give me no cause for great hope that they will abide by this kind of agreement without strong enforcement of the sanctions, which has brought them to the table. Remember, that's why they're entering into this interim agreement. Tough enforcement of those sanctions and vigilant monitoring and inspection and hard negotiating. But at the end of that 6-month period, we need to be prepared. We need to give the president authority and the tools he needs for stronger sanctions so that they will either stay at the table or be brought back.
Senator, the White House has repeatedly said they don't want to have new sanctions imposed right now because of these kind of talks and trying to work with the Iranians. How do you thread the needle between doing, say, a 6-month bill and not undermining the work that they're trying to do right now and essentially making this deal unworkable by doing something like that?
Certainly, we don't want to undermine the president.
See how Harry Reid reacts. I think because if he sort of falls in line with the White House, and if maybe they can get Schumer to back off a little bit of his criticism, then that essentially ends this. And you know, he's not going to bring a bill forward that has sanctions or anything that's going to undermine the White House. But if he comes out against it, or if he sort of starts to line up with where Schumer has been, it could become a problem for the White House. They could, in theory, move legislation that has some kind of sanctions regime, even if it is a sort of 6-month delay on it. That still could hurt the administration's ability to deal with the Iranians, I would think so.
Sister, right?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think Wyoming is a very conservative state, and I don't think that being against gay marriage and even being against someone in your family being married who's lesbian or gay is going to necessarily hurt you. But this notion of sort of a pattern of attacking people that have relied on you and that you should have some sort of loyalty to, that is something that I think will hurt her. People out west, loyalty is to people who live there, and this is a behavior that they would not sort of go.
Well, right, loyalty and family, and that's the part that's the thing that I see on this is because like Dick Cheney basically supported gay marriage, and I think I never really saw the right revolt against Dick Cheney because of gay marriage because they sort of understood he's talking about his daughter here. Now they never really connected that to the broader policy implications, but I think if Liz Cheney spoke of this in Wyoming as this is my sister, and damn it, I'm standing with my sister. I think even among conservative people in Wyoming, there'd be, she'd lose for 1,000 other reasons, but I think on that she'd be okay.
I think so too. I mean, you have the legacy of the Matthew Shepard case in Wyoming, and I think what we're seeing here is, in this particular case, this is the problem with the Republican Party right now, and it's all about primaries, and it's all about how do you deal with the most extreme elements of that party. So, from a Democratic perspective, there's a lot of good schadenfreude going on, and but it's really sad. I mean, you hate to see this with the family, particularly again when they've been so receptive to Mary's lifestyle.
Yeah, they threaded that needle so well when Dick Cheney was vice president throughout the campaign. Even in 2004, when Bush and Cheney ran on a platform of enshrining or enshrining in the Constitution opposition to same-sex marriage. So there was that, and now it's just completely out in the open. Now there's no ability to keep it under wraps. Everything, I think, bad that could have happened to Liz Cheney's campaign seems to have happened. She's thrown her sister under the bus, and I would say this is not simply an issue where siblings disagree. I disagree with my sister plenty, but I've never argued that she should be treated unequally under the law. Right. So there's that.
I've been tempted. Never done.
Right, and beyond that, she's alienated family friends. She's had embarrassing moments, like when she couldn't get a fishing license in Wyoming because she wasn't there for long enough. And she's down by 50 points in the polls. She can't quit because her slogan is, I'm a fighter.
Right, well, that's the thing. I mean, this could end really ugly in terms of the numbers if she sticks this after primary day. Part of it is sort of heartened by all of this because I have very conflicted feelings about political dynasties in general. I come from a state, Massachusetts, that has the most famous political dynasty of them all. But I also, in a lot of levels, I completely get the backlash that they create when you have, open seats for office and somebody, hey, they've got the magic family name, whatever it happens to be in that state. I completely get the backlash, too, because it's like, well, what'd you ever do, besides get born into the, the right family?
Yeah. Yeah, and, especially, look, we on the East Coast have, we've had Kennedys in New York. Mostly they've stayed in Massachusetts, or they haven't gone that far. I guess Florida, too. But she's lived in Virginia. I mean, she really should be running for Senate in Virginia. I mean, basically, if you look at the amount of time she's spent, she's talking about her roots. So there's also that. There's that sense that she's kind of a carpetbagger coming back to this place where she thought it was going to be easy to knock off this older gentleman that she thought maybe had served long enough, and he didn't agree. And it's up to the voters, and it looks like the voters agree with him.
Well, that's it. She can't